Hurricane Franklin is strengthening as it heads towards Mexico. I'm Mike Naso from the IPR Tropical Update video page here on YouTube with the latest on the first hurricane of the 2017 Atlantic hurricane season, that is Hurricane Franklin. We saw it strike the Yucatan Peninsula. Within the last, say, 36 hours, it's moved over the Bay of Campeche, and it has begun to strengthen. It is now a strong Category 1 hurricane, and it could get a little stronger prior to landfall. There it is, obviously sitting in the extreme southwestern Gulf of Mexico. It will not strike the United States thanks to the high pressure to the north of it, keeping it on that westward course, maybe even a little west-southwest, but that will slam it directly into Mexico near areas of Tuxpan, Veracruz, south of Tampico, with very strong hurricane force winds, battering waves, decent storm surge heights for sure, and of course heavy rainfall as high as 15 inches in some areas. Throughout the rest of the Atlantic, we do have this little area of disturbed weather over the Bahamas, and our Invest 99L still out there looking much better defined than it was earlier, caught up in a little upper level low, and we'll talk about that a little bit, but the main game in town obviously is our season's first hurricane, Hurricane Franklin. Now, ignore the writing there on the screen. I have the latest as of 8 o'clock Eastern Time here in the United States, and the hurricane winds were up to 85 miles per hour, so it's strengthened, and it's a stronger Category 1, moving west at 12 miles an hour, and its current location is 135 miles east-southeast of Tuxpan, Mexico, or 90 miles northeast of Veracruz. So it continues to move in that westward direction, which should bring it to shore sometime in the next, say, 8 to 12 hours. And the pressure has dropped further down to 983 millibars, so it is strengthening. There is a chance it could become a Category 2 hurricane, but nevertheless, heavy rainfall is probably the greatest threat, although right at the coast, this will pack a wallop, especially if it continues to intensify as it moves in. By 24 hours from now, it should be over mainland Mexico, giving some heavy rains but beginning to dissipate into a tropical depression. But prior to that, we're going to be dealing with storm surge, waves, hurricane winds, and, of course, very heavy rainfall. As mentioned, it's moving fast enough to where hopefully we won't have tremendous mudslides, but it's not moving as fast as it could be moving. It could be moving at 20 miles an hour instead of 12 miles an hour, so that is a bit concerning. There's the visible satellite imagery as the sun goes down. Look at those thunderstorm tops bubbling right there over the eye of the hurricane. Still not a very well-defined eye, it's undergoing a little bit of shear from the north, but nevertheless strengthening, clearly a hurricane. An impressive circulation too. The coastline is creeping up right there. So this is going to pack a wallop if these storms continue to fire and the hurricane intensifies as it comes ashore. Hurricanes that are intensifying at landfall are much worse than hurricanes that are either weakening or at a steady state, as those winds are getting forced down to the surface, especially right at the coastline, and that's the concern with Hurricane Franklin. There's the infrared satellite imagery. You could see that even better, how the thunderstorm tops are blowing up right there. And this gives a good indication, by the way, of that shear I was talking about, which I'll show you the shear map. You can kind of see the northerly shear impacting the system, and it does have that slight south of west component to its track. So this happens a lot in the Bay of Campeche, and the Hurricane Center touched on that a couple of days ago, that we could even see that little bend from the high pressure to the north of it that we've seen with so many hurricanes. Carl in 2010, Isidore in 2002. When they get this far south, a lot of times they like to dip to the south under high pressure ridges. There's the thunderstorms blowing up over mainland Mexico as the nighttime heat goes on. Very moist and muggy down here in the southern Gulf of Mexico. It's August 9th. It's hurricane season. It's ramping up, and obviously we now have our first hurricane, so we'll see what the impacts are as Franklin comes ashore, but as of right now, definitely heavy rainfall and gusty winds, especially at the coastline, and we're going to keep an eye on it. There's the wind field. You can see this was as of 5 p.m. Eastern, so it's a little outdated, but you can see tropical storm force winds extend out a pretty good ways, so they could impact areas all the way from Tampico all the way down the coastline. However, the hurricane force winds are obviously much closer to the center of circulation, so as it comes ashore, those winds will be in a small area, but where they are, especially if it's intensifying, that's where the event's going to seem very prolonged to anybody in the path, and we're going to wait and see exactly what towns and communities are directly impacted by the eye of the hurricane as it comes through. It did create a lot of tropical storm force winds straight across the Yucatan, and they're just starting to impinge now along the coastline of mainland Mexico. Now, as we move a little bit further out from Franklin, we still have 99L. Certainly not the monster hurricane everybody thought it would be, but it's certainly not going away either. You can see the current motion is towards the northwest, and it does look like those unseasonably strong fronts moving off the east coast should allow it to slip around the ridge and move out to sea. However, it could develop. It could. Right now, the Hurricane Center says about 50-50 shot in the next 5 days, so we could see our next storm out of this, but it looks as though it would probably turn somewhere between Hatteras and Bermuda, which would of course be great news. There's also another feature I mentioned before over the Bahamas, but that also looks like it might swing around and end up getting out of there. So after Franklin, we could have a little bit of a lull, but again, we are just getting started here in what looks like it'll be an active hurricane season. So for the coastline of Mexico tonight, if you're watching this and you live near Veracruz, batten down the hatches, because we have a strengthening hurricane, probably going to make landfall as a Category 1, maybe a Category 2. Certainly if it had another day over water, this could have been our first major hurricane too. Hopefully not a sign of things to come. So I'm Mike Naso, that's the latest on Hurricane Franklin. Stay tuned, we'll keep you updated.